The Real Dispatch.
Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for taking the time to do part one of our 20-part series.
My greatest pleasure.
Question number one from ChatGPT. What are your earliest memories as a child?
My first memory, and I guess I was under 5, we were in our first apartment, and my mother was ironing, and I was asking her when I was going to go to school.
Tell us a little bit about your mother.
My mother was a beautiful person. Both my mother and father, they were both gentle souls. I never heard them scream at each other. They never screamed at us. They were just did everything for their children and for other people also. And they never asked for anything in return. If we needed something, we needed money, even though they had very little money, they would just give it to us without any expectations of getting it back.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like where you grew up?
So when we were around 5, we moved into a house which we rented. So we had the first floor. And it was my mother, my father, my sister, and I, and my brother, and my grandmother. My grandmother lived with my parents from the day they were married, and she didn't speak any English. She only spoke Yiddish. So my brother and her shared a room. They got the big room. My sister and I shared a room. And when you opened up the high-riser, there literally was no room. It went up to the dresser. And it was in Borough Park, and we all shared one bathroom. And we had a front porch, and we had in front of the house like a stoop with a area like a patio that you could sit outside. So I was the youngest, my sister was the oldest, and my brother was in the middle, and he was a typical middle child syndrome. But since he was the only boy, he was the prince of the family. So my brother and I used to be the ones that did all the fighting, except I was very skinny and he was very fat. So I couldn't really physically fight him. So it was more like we'd scream at each other. I used to usually scream, "Drop dead," and then run into a closet and either lock myself in or he locked me in. So he didn't do this with my sister because she was older and she started working earlier, so he always wanted to be able to borrow money from her. So it was basically Larry and I that always had the fighting issues.
Besides the fighting issues, what are some other things you used to like to do? I'm not thinking you like to do that, but what are some other things you like to do?
Played a lot of Scrabble. I was a little rambunctious in school, so I was like one of the kids that liked to have a good time in school. And I had a group of friends. We were all like the tallest girls in the class. We were always at the back of the line. And we used to volunteer all the time to be monitors. We'd go to the principal's office. It was a yeshiva, so there was a Hebrew principal and an English principal. So it was more the English principal we'd offer to be monitors. We had on top of the building, there was where we used to go for recess, and I guess they had some equipment there. We'd ask to leave the bathroom, and then we'd run upstairs and go up to the roof and run around.
What was your favorite subject in school?
History.
Speaking of history, what were the most significant historical events that happened in your youth, and how did they impact your life?
When you say historical, are you talking about world historical?
Yeah.
So,
New York City?
that I can remember.
Something that impacted your youth that happened.
Well, I think the most historical event was 1963. I was a junior in high school, and that's when John Kennedy was assassinated. And I remember we were in a student government meeting and somebody came in to say that Kennedy was shot. And we didn't really believe it because we had never heard of any president being assassinated other than Lincoln. And I remember first we go, oh good, maybe we'll get a day off from school. And then within a short time we realized that it was real. And everybody was like so upset. I don't remember, people were crying probably. And I remember, I think it happened on a Thursday, school was closed on Friday. And the entire weekend, all we did was sit in front of the TV, watching the funeral, the procession. We saw Oswald being assassinated in real time by Jack Ruby. It was just an incredible weekend.
They were too young for like 9/11 in terms of like.
Well, 9/11 was, there was no comparison. That was just one event. 9/11 impacted on the entire country, and the assassination of Kennedy was a very sad event, but it didn't change anything in the way we lived. 9/11 impacted on us where all of a sudden the world that we knew was gone, because you always felt so safe in America. Even during World War II, America didn't get bombed. The Korean War, any war, World War I, nothing ever happened in the United States. We were too far away from all the conflicts. This is the first time as an individual and as a country you felt totally vulnerable, you know.
How did you and Grandpa meet? Tell us a little bit about the courtship.
The first time Grandpa and I met, I was in Hunter College, uptown, and I was standing on some steps to the top with my cousin Harriet, and Grandpa came to meet her because he was dating her. And it was just, hi, how are you? You know, I got to meet him, and he was also good friends with a good friend of ours, and that's how he met Harriet. He was fixed up with her. So I met him probably a couple of times. Now fast forward, and it's 2 years later, and Grandpa and I are friends because we both went to Brooklyn College, and Grandpa was taking Hebrew, and I knew how to speak Hebrew because I took Hebrew in yeshiva, and I took it in high school and college. So I used to tutor Grandpa and a friend of his who were both taking Hebrew at the same time. It's 1967, and in June of '67, the Six-Day War happens in Israel. And at the end of the war, they needed volunteers. So Grandpa left to go to Europe and become a volunteer. And that summer, I decided to go to, it was after my sophomore year of college, and a friend of mine and I decided to go to Europe and to Israel. And I told Grandpa, that when I go to Israel, I'll write him, send him a note at American Express, because that's where we went to get all our mail. So whatever country you were in, if you were expecting any mail, you'd go to American Express, and they used to hold your mail. So I think I was only in Israel 1 or 2 days when we were walking on the streets of Tel Aviv, my friend Rona and I, when someone covered my eyes and said, "Guess who?" And it was Grandpa. And the rest was history. From that point on, we hitchhiked from Tel Aviv to Eilat and back again. And when we came home, we were a couple.
What were the challenges and joys of raising children?
It was mostly joys, very few challenges. Both you and Michelle, we were really lucky because you were both really, really loving children. Michelle came to see you in the hospital right after you were born, and from the moment you were born, she loved you. So there was never any jealousy issues. You were maybe a little more difficult than Michelle, because if you said to Michelle, go to your room, which I think I only did once in her whole childhood, she went up there and cried. If I said to you, go to your room, you went up there and threw all your toys out of the room into the hallway. And I remember saying to Daddy, well, that's pretty stupid. If his toys are in the hallway, how's he going to play with them? So, but both of you were just, my biggest challenge with you was that you were a very picky eater. And I was a picky eater growing up. So I never wanted to put pressure on you to eat. I said, oh, well, when I was in college, I started trying new foods. So I hated when people used to say, oh, you're the worst eater or whatever. So Daddy would always say, well, why don't you tell him he has to eat this? And I used to go, when he's ready, he'll eat it. But we did try and get you to eat some things. And every time we wanted you to try something new, you'd say, like a few minutes after it was put on your plate, we'd say, just take one bite. You'd always have a bathroom emergency, and then we never saw you again. When you first decided to try something new was when you were working out in a gym, and you were talking to the guys there, and they said you need to have protein in your diet in order to build muscle. And you came home and you said, I need to have protein in my diet. I think I'll try tofu. And I remember thinking, what kind of kid wants to start with tofu? You would think they would try chicken or steak or a hamburger. But I used to order from the Chinese restaurant, tofu and broccoli, hold the broccoli. And I remember once going into the Chinese restaurant where we used to order from, and I said, oh, I'm the lady that always calls tofu and broccoli, hold the broccoli. And I think she didn't either understand English or she thought it was crazy, like I was coming in to introduce myself.
What was the most challenging period in your life, and how did you overcome it?
The most challenging period in my life was having cancer and going through chemo and its impact on not only me, but everyone else. And then finding out after I've been told I was cured that I had another form of cancer, which was even more deadly than the first one. So the first one, I don't think I was too scared because everybody used to say, well, that's the best cancer to cure. The second one was more frightening because of the transfusions and the black and blue marks and the bleeding. So, but I came through it. I think the way I see things is I live in the today, and I don't project to the future, and I try not to project to the past. So whether it's compartmentalizing or not, I just try and live in the now.
So you did not mention being a teacher.
Right, I forgot about that. So I became a teacher because I couldn't get a job in advertising or television. And for me, the challenge was I taught in a very poor area. And I remember when I first started teaching, the first school I taught in had a teacher, I guess you can call it a teacher trainer, who worked with new teachers. And I remember he said, and I used this information when I raised you and Michelle, I tried to. He said, if you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. So he said, at the beginning of the year, say you're going to take something away and then follow through. So every year at the beginning of the school year, when the kids were going to gym, which was a free period for me, and we were on the staircase, I would say, if anybody talks, we're going back to the room. And of course, somebody talked, and we'd go back to the room. So that always helped me like sort of set a standard that when I say, if you're not quiet, we're gonna, obviously I didn't say I'm taking away science, but if it's gonna take away music or art or gym, those were the things that mattered. So my challenge was always like getting my class in a very structured, disciplined mode. That was my challenge, where even though it could have been the slowest class in the grade, I knew that when I said something, they listened, they sat in their seats, they were not wild. I used to be able to leave the room, get a cup of coffee from the teacher's room. The president of the class would come up and continue the lesson. And even if I was late in the morning because the trains were late or something, the president of the class would go in front of the room and start a lesson. So I always felt like I excelled at that.
What is your proudest accomplishment or minute?
Well, obviously it's you and Michelle, and it's not just you and Michelle, but the relationship that the two of you have together. I feel that's something that Daddy and I had a part in. I mean, you hear of so many families where siblings don't get along, that they don't have a relationship. And just like the beautiful relationship that not only you have, but the kids have together, and Kelly and Michelle and David, I mean, that's something to be proud of, and that's something that...
What about this? Is there, when you were younger, did you have a vision for your career or for your life that, not that it was better, but it was just different? You grew up Orthodox, right? So it's thought,
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about like what you envisioned, if you can remember.
Well, I grew up in an Orthodox family, but I myself never felt Orthodox. Even when I was in school and we used to pray in the morning, daven, I used to just get up when I felt it was an appropriate time that I had I would have finished, then I would sit. So they didn't know until I came back from 1967, when I came back from Israel and Europe, because that was the first time I ever went out on a Friday night. And when I came back, because I was one of these kids that said, well, I'm going to be honest with my parents, I told them, that I go out now, that I'm not Orthodox. And of course, they were very upset. They were worried the rabbi next door was going to see. My mother tried to block the door. She said my father was going to get a heart attack. So what I started doing is like Friday afternoon, calling them up right before Shabbos to say I'm staying at a friend's.
What do you miss most about Zaidi?
Zaidi was the kindest, nicest person. Both of my parents, it's amazing how they were introduced. I mean, it wasn't like...
as a father, you?
He was just very gentle. I mean, he worked very hard. So, when he came home from work, I mean, it was more like the most time we saw him was on the weekend, because I think he may have even worked on Sunday. So the only day that he was really home, because he had his own business.
So when did you ever have like long conversations with him about life,
Well, I remember having conversations with him about like how he ended up in Budapest, because he wasn't born there. He was born like in a border town. I think it was in Poland. When he went to Budapest, again, they had no education. They didn't go to school. Maybe they went to yeshiva or something. He got a job with a antique dealer. They were very honest. We once had clothing stolen from the clothing line. And I don't remember if they called the police or whatever, like people were saying, oh, say it was more than it was. But whether it's honesty or afraid, I mean, they wouldn't do it.
Tell me a little bit, tell me what you miss most about me.
Well, I used to speak to Bubby every day. And I mean, there's like nothing she wouldn't do for you. I mean, do you remember going there and you said, Bubby, how do you make potato blintzes? Do you remember this? And she started making it for you. She goes, you take a little this, you little that. Here, she'd say to me, here, watch so you know. I go, no, don't tell me to watch. He's the one that wants it. Tell him to watch it. But she had no recipe, meaning she goes, it was all touch and feel. But any time that you or Michelle were going there, I mean, do you remember she'd have like blintzes and...
What was she like when you were growing up? Like, and she wasn't a Bubby, she was just a mother.
Well, I used to say, like, you know, like if I'd wake up in the morning and I didn't want to go to the Hebrew, I'd go, I have like a stomach ache, I can't go to school. I mean, there was never ever, you have to go to school. I mean,
you have any,
like we never had any restrictions what movies we could see because they didn't know any of these movies. They never went to them.
What's the best advice that Bubby ever gave you?
She said, be good to your husband and dress like a lawyer's wife.
Was there any family traditions that you guys had growing up?
Well, we always had Friday night dinner together and pretty much had lunch every Saturday together.
Is there anything you wish you had done differently in your life?
Well, if looking at it from today's eyes, yeah, maybe if I had been more aggressive in my career, like maybe if I would have really done something, you know, in television, because that was my major. But I didn't have that gene in me. I was a much more laid-back person. But I did know, I also said that I was never going to be a secretary or teacher, and I ended up a teacher, so who knows?
All right, final question of part 1 of the series. What do you want your grandchildren and future generations to know about your life and your experiences?
The most important thing in life is who you love and loving your family and being kind to each other. It's nice. Always be true to yourself. Don't take advantage of people. The way you want to be, the way you treat people should be the way you want to be treated.
Is that how you live your life?
Yeah. I think I'm a very loyal friend. But if you do something to hurt my children, grandchildren, husband, I'm not such a nice person. I don't forget.
All right, well, thank you for taking the time.
You're quite welcome. Alan, do you want to take a little bit of a nap? Thank you.